All right, so today I wanted to make a video about vote splitting. It's a very common topic amongst conservative and PPC circles. And for starters, I wanted to mention up front, I'm relatively critical of both sides of the whole vote splitting argument. Both the PPC and the conservatives, I think that they could both do things better. But I think the reality is that as much as a lot of people like to hate hearing it, the PPC is more right on the topic. Now, Maxime Bernier says here all the other parties are sliding to the left and even the totalitarian far left. Someone has to say, no, we're not going to accept it and compromise. That's why the PPC exists and we're here to stay. As far as criticism for the PPC goes, first, I'd like to mention that, and then I'll get into the conservatives because there's a lot more to unpack there. As far as the PPC goes, specifically like the Maxime Berniers of the world, I don't think that they should be as heavy-handed and critical of the conservatives as they are. I think they're a little bit too combative when it comes to the conservatives. I think the better way of going about it would simply be just to put their ideas out there and not worry about going after the conservatives all the time. They should be critical of Trudeau and the NDPs of the world. I mean, criticize the conservatives as well, but I think they're a little too overt and a little too combative about it. Um, but that's kind of my criticism for the PPC. As far as my criticism for the conservatives go, number one, um, the people that are all up in arms, that are all mad at the PPC, you're directing your anger at the wrong person, at the wrong group of people. It is objectively true that the conservatives have moved away from most of their principles that they once had. In fact, in a lot of ways, very far away. So if you want to criticize someone, criticize the conservatives. I mean, especially if you live in a riding with one of these more centrist conservatives, you got to be critical of these people because that's why the PPC exists. If the conservatives had stayed where they were, if they would actually be against all these, the carbon tax and all this, climate garbage, which Aaron O'Toole isn't. I mean, he's against the carbon tax, but he wants to replace it with something that's pretty much the same. If they wanted to cut immigration, if they actually took a definitive stance on things like free speech and less taxes, less regulations, which again, they're for some of that kind of stuff, but the big problem is when it comes to most of it, they're way too milquetoast about it. They're way too willy-nilly and like I don't know, where do you guys stand on this? On one hand, you claim to want to put Canada first, which is what Aaron O'Toole says, but then on the other hand, he supports massive amounts of immigration, right? Like you can't have Canada first and mass immigration. You have to pick one or the other because if you have mass immigration, you ain't Canada first, right? You ain't Canada first. You're corporations and votes for the left first. So again, that's the first point I wanted to bring up. So for anybody who's writing these PPC people or getting in fights with them on online, you're directing your anger at the wrong group of people. Because if the conservatives actually became conservative again, the PPC would probably wouldn't exist, right? But I mean, I think the PPC is going to continue to exist because the conservatives aren't going to move, and that's why people are so critical of them is that they know the conservatives aren't going to move. And the other big idea I wanted to bring up here is that the people that are too many conservatives in Canada, they're too blinded by their hatred of Trudeau. Now, again, I hate Trudeau as much as anybody else, but they're too blinded by their hatred of Trudeau to realize that it's not Justin Trudeau you're against, because Justin Trudeau is one person. It is Justin Trudeau's ideas that we are against. Because let's just say Justin Trudeau was, arrested and thrown in jail tomorrow, or he died of a heart attack or something. It's highly likely that someone that is just as far left and has just as many crazy ideas as he does would replace him. In fact, I would say it's as likely as not that someone even more fringe than he is would replace him. So this is the big problem people have, that they're so blinded by their hatred of Trudeau that they're not looking at it from a rational perspective. And this is the reason why the vote splitting argument, at least in this case, I think is stupid. Because if you look in the States, for example, you have the libertarians and you have the Republicans. Take this example. And the libertarians are definitely wrong about this one in that Jo Jorgensen is not a libertarian. She's every bit as sold out as the libertarians like to think that any Republican or conservative is. So again, voting for Jorgensen, I think, is vote splitting in the states because Jorgensen is she's not a libertarian. If I would honestly argue Donald Trump is more of a libertarian, and I think it would be very easy to make that argument. Now again, the libertarian founding, again, actually, yeah, that would be a lot more than Trump. But again, Jo Jorgensen, not a libertarian. So again, I think that the vote splitting argument makes sense there, and that the vote splitting argument only makes sense is if there's two parties that exist that are very close together in their ideas, right? They're very close together in their ideas. But the conservatives and the liberal, or sorry, the conservatives and the PPC in Canada, they're not, right? The conservatives are about as centrist is, right? They're not actually to the right. Maybe slightly to the right, but they're not actually where one would think a conservative traditionally is. The PPC actually are there. The PPC are a good balance between the center and the right. They're probably pretty much right in the middle of the center and the far right. That is where the conservatives traditionally were. So again, that's something I wanted to point out too, is that it's not Justin Trudeau that we're worried about. It's Justin Trudeau's ideas. And this is the problem, that the conservatives agree with Justin Trudeau on a lot of stuff, And there's a lot of stuff where they agree on, but maybe just not to the same extent. Like if it was up to Justin Trudeau, they probably would shut down the entire oil and gas sector. The conservative solution is, let's just heavily tax and regulate it, right? Again, so is there that much of a difference between the two? Well, no, there really isn't. So this is what I wanted to bring up when it comes to the whole vote splitting thing, in that I think both sides deserve their fair share of criticism. The thing is, the PPC is right on the issue, right? In that if the conservatives actually were worried about vote splitting, they wouldn't have moved so far to the left, right? They wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have done it. And here's another thing too, that I think a lot of people, the conservative people that accuse the PPC of vote splitting, is that a lot of people who voted for the PPC weren't conservative voters before that, right? Like a lot of them were not, or at the very least, they weren't conservative voters, and they wouldn't have voted conservative in the last election at the very least. Like, I'm in that group. I voted conservative in 2015, and I voted PPC in 2019, in the last time around, right? And not to mention, I think two people that I know personally are also in that category, and I think I know one or two more that were very close to being in that category as well. So this is the thing that the people who accuse the PPC of vote splitting don't understand, is that if the PPC didn't exist, a lot of these people just wouldn't vote. They assume that they would vote conservative, but that's oftentimes not the case. In fact, I would say definitely the majority. I would say probably, I don't know, 2/3, maybe 3/4 of PPC voters, if the PPC didn't exist, they wouldn't vote conservative, right? So again, the amount of PPC votes that would have otherwise been conservative votes is actually a lot smaller than what a lot of these people think. In that they were using the example of that one Toronto riding, which I don't actually think the PPC had enough votes that if you joined the PPC and the Conservatives, they would have beat the Liberal. I think they were still just short. But this is the thing they don't understand, is that all those people wouldn't vote conservative. I would say maybe 20-30% tops, maybe slightly more depending on the riding. If it was a rural riding and the conservative actually was like a true conservative, which like a lot of these, Alberta and Saskatchewan conservatives are, I think there's a lot of them that actually are actual conservatives and don't actually differ from the PPC all that much, then maybe. But this was a Toronto riding, and I don't even think it was Max. Was it Maxime Bernier's? There was two. Either way, it still wasn't enough. Number one, and number two, um, even if it was, these people they're assuming that all of these people would vote for the conservative, which isn't the case. It isn't the case. Maybe half the people tops. Like I'd like to see a poll on this, is of PPC supporters, and you simply ask, if the PPC didn't exist, who would you vote for? Not vote, conservative, or other. I'd like to see a poll on that, because I think it would be very interesting. And I think the majority would be not vote, or at the very least, it would be other if there was like a libertarian candidate or some other third party. But I don't think that more than half the people would vote conservative. I think some of them would, but not the majority. And that's another thing that I think they're forgetting. So again, those are the main points I wanted to bring up with vote splitting, and that it is the conservatives' fault, like it or not. Again, I wish it wasn't the case. I wish there was a party that would otherwise have enough support that could beat the liberals, that actually was principled. But that's the problem too, is that the people think that, oh, just because they're conservative doesn't mean that things are going to be all that different. They're still going to flood Canada with immigration. They're still going to push these stupid regulations when it comes to climate change. Are they going to cut taxes? Are they going to cut regulations? Are they actually going to put Canada first? I don't know. Like, I don't know. And that's the big problem too, is that the conservatives seem to be more worried about trying to sway the votes of people who are center left and leftists than they are worried about swaying the votes of people, of actual right wingers. And that's the problem too, is that they don't understand is that those most of those people aren't going to vote for them no matter how far to the left they go. It doesn't matter. They're not going to vote for them. And that's a big problem. This is why I think this is one of the main reasons why I think Canada is so screwed long term, is that there's no way that there's going to be a real principled opposition win. It's going to be liberals or liberal light, and that we're never going to have, at the very least, not within the next generation, unless we have a massive groundbreaking event that changes things. If the entire system collapses or something like that, maybe. But we are either going to have a far left government or we're going to have a center left government. We were never going to have a government that's to the right of center anytime soon. It's just not going to happen, and that's a very unfortunate thing. And I think that the biggest reason for that is it's mass immigration. If Canada wouldn't have had such high immigration numbers, we probably still would be able to do that, right? Because the problem is that um, Toronto and Ontario and the East basically decide the election, right? They basically decide the election. Why is that? Is because they're the cities that, Ontario, Vancouver, Montreal, and a lot of these, cities in Ontario, their population has absolutely skyrocketed over the last generation or so because of mass immigration, and they have gotten more power because of that. The East has disproportionately more power in the Senate as well, right? So again, this is the problem too, is that the only real solution is Wexit, right? I think the only real solution is Wexit. The problem is that's probably never going to happen. Not because I don't think you could gain support. I do think that you could genuinely gain enough support. The problem, I think, is that it would be sabotaged in multiple ways. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today as far as vote splitting goes. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on those other platforms. All those links are below. If you want to support me, you can do that. But again, any support is very much appreciated.